Emma had always felt like an outsider in her own family, but it wasn't until that day in Italy that the full weight of her isolation hit her. At 25, she was still trying to figure out her life, but she thought she'd at least have her family's support. She had been on a vacation in Italy with her parents and younger brother, all of them trying to escape the tensions that had built up over the years. But one argument over something trivial, shattered whatever pretense of unity they had left. It started in the small town of San Gimignano, a picturesque place with winding cobblestone streets, narrow alleys, and buildings that seemed like they had stood for centuries. Emma had suggested they explore the town a little more, but her mother, Claire, and her brother, Ben, had already grown tired. Her father, Richard, who had been distant for years, didn't care either way, just nodding off in the car as they drove. The tension between them had been suffocating for weeks. Emma, in her frustration, had said something sharp about how she never felt like she belonged with them. That was all it took. Claire snapped, Ben rolled his eyes, and Richard sighed in the way that made Emma feel invisible. "You're never happy," her mother said sharply. "Why can't you just let things go? Why must you always complain?" Emma's eyes widened in disbelief. She hadn't been complaining. She was just speaking her mind. But Claire didn't want to hear it, and neither did Ben. Their father's silence only deepened the sting. They were tired of her. The silence that followed was thick, unbearable. Emma felt her heart race. She was about to say something more, something that might make them see her pain, but Claire cut her off. "Fine," Claire said coldly. "If you're so unhappy here, we'll just leave you behind. It's obvious you don't want to be a part of this family anymore." At first, Emma thought it was a joke, but the way her mother's face remained stern, her words cruel, told her it wasn't. Before she could even respond, her family was already climbing into the car, the engine roaring to life. Ben shot her a smirk that was as empty as the silence between them. "Let's see how she comes back," he laughed, looking at Emma through the rearview mirror as the car pulled away. Emma stood frozen in the middle of the road, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear their laughter echoing in her mind, the sound of their departure like a slap across her face. It was the final, undeniable proof that she meant nothing to them. The hurt was sharp, but there was something else too, a flicker of something stronger. She didn't run after them. She didn't scream. She didn't beg them to come back. Instead, Emma stood there, silently watching them disappear into the distance. She felt the weight of their abandonment press against her chest, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Her life had just been stripped down to its core, and all she had left was herself. Emma took a deep breath and turned away, stepping into the small town she had once thought of as just a stop on their vacation. Now, it felt like the start of something new, something she didn't fully understand yet, but something she would have to face on her own. The family that had always been her anchor was now gone. Emma felt the grief, but also a quiet sense of freedom beginning to take root. With one last look at the empty street where her family had driven away, Emma realized something. She was done. This was it. She would never return to them. For the first time in her life, Emma felt truly alone. Standing in the middle of San Gimignano, with her family nowhere to be found, she didn't know where to go, what to do, or even how to feel. The cobblestone streets seemed to stretch endlessly in front of her, as though mocking her isolation. She thought about running to the nearest airport and flying back to the United States, but she knew, deep down, that would be an escape, one she didn't deserve. Her mind replayed the scene with her family, the harsh words that had been exchanged, and the look on their faces. Her mother, Claire, had always been cold and distant, but this was something else. There had been no apology, no regret in her eyes when she'd driven off, leaving Emma standing there. Her brother Ben had laughed, a laugh that felt like a slap in the face. And her father? He had said nothing, as usual, remaining a silent observer in his own family. She could still hear the faint echo of his sighs from earlier that day, a reminder that even when he was there, he was never really there. The pain of that betrayal washed over Emma like a cold wave, but she fought against it. She refused to let her tears fall. She had cried enough for them, for the people who would never love her the way she needed. No, this was different now. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. She found a small cafe near the square and decided to sit for a while. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, served her coffee without asking too many questions. Emma was grateful for the silence, for the peace of not having to explain herself. She sipped the hot drink slowly, allowing herself to feel the warmth spread through her. She thought about what she would do next, where she would go. Greece had always intrigued her. She had heard it was beautiful, peaceful, and filled with history. Maybe it was time for her to explore it, to find something, anything, that could fill the emptiness she now carried inside. Emma didn't have a plan. She didn't need one. For once in her life, she was making decisions for herself, not for her family's expectations. She didn't owe them anything, not anymore. But even in her decision to walk away, Emma could still hear their voices in her mind. Let's see how she comes back. Their laughter haunted her. It echoed in the corners of her thoughts, each time reminding her of how insignificant she was to them. They had abandoned her in the name of their own happiness, their own convenience. She was just an afterthought. It stung more than she wanted to admit. She had always sought their approval, their affection, and in one cruel moment they had ripped it all away. But now she was in control. She didn't need them. The realization was a bittersweet one. She would survive without them. She would prove them wrong. The weight of the decision felt heavy in her chest. But as she stared out of the cafe window at the bustling street, Emma began to sense a shift inside of her. Maybe it wasn't just isolation she was feeling. It was freedom. A freedom she hadn't known in years. For the first time in her life, she could live without the suffocating grip of her family's expectations. She was no longer their daughter. She was Emma. Just Emma. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. She stood up, paid for her coffee, and left the cafe. There was a plane waiting for her in a few hours. One that would take her far away, to a new place. A new chapter. It wasn't an escape. It was her chance to rebuild, to make her own way in the world. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she was ready to find out. The flight to Greece was long, but Emma hardly noticed the time passing. She had a window seat, staring out over the vast expanse of blue, letting the hum of the airplane and the endless sky above her soothe her troubled mind. She was leaving everything behind, her family, her past, the years of unspoken tension, and the constant feeling of inadequacy. But she was also stepping into something new, something unfamiliar, and there was an exhilarating sense of freedom in that. She didn't know what awaited her in Greece, but that was part of the appeal. She wasn't looking for answers anymore. She was just looking for herself. The idea of being anonymous in a new country, of having no one's expectations or judgments weighing her down, was almost too beautiful to comprehend. When the plane finally touched down in Athens, Emma felt a mix of relief and anticipation. She had done it. She had taken the first step toward her own future, without the fear of being judged or rejected. For the first time, she wasn't worried about what anyone thought of her. The moment the plane's wheels hit the ground, she knew she had made the right choice. Emma took a bus into the heart of the city, her eyes wide as she absorbed the sights, the sounds, and the smells of Athens. It was everything she had hoped for. The sun-drenched streets, the friendly faces, the slow pace of life that felt like a world away from the urgency of her previous existence. She checked into a modest hotel, unpacked her few belongings, and made a promise to herself to savor every moment of this new life she was carving out for herself. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Emma wandered through the ancient streets, visited the Parthenon, and spent long hours at local cafes, sketching in her notebook. She found comfort in the simplicity of it all. She was no longer just the daughter of Claire or the sister of Ben. She was just Emma, and that was enough. The language barrier was a challenge at first, but Emma found herself learning quickly. She met a few locals, artists, travelers, people who had left their own pasts behind, just as she had. There was something calming about being around people who didn't know her history, her family, her struggles. In their eyes, she was just a stranger, a blank page to fill with new experiences. But as much as she relished her freedom, there were moments when the loneliness crept in. There were days when she would sit in her small hotel room, staring out at the city below, and feel the sting of abandonment once again. The familiar ache of missing her family, despite everything they had done to her, still lingered. It was during one of these quiet moments that her phone buzzed with a notification, a message from her mother, Claire. "We've been trying to reach you," it read. "Are you okay? Please let us know where you are." Emma stared at the screen, the words blurring in front of her eyes. She had expected this. It had been only a month, and already they were starting to feel the absence she had left behind. Her mother, who had always dismissed her, now seemed desperate to know where she was, what she was doing. She didn't respond. Not yet. There was no need. Instead, Emma sat back, took a deep breath, and let herself feel the weight of the decision she had made. She had left them behind for a reason, and though the pull of her family's expectations still tugged at her heart, she knew she could never go back. Not until they understood her worth. Not until they recognized that she was more than just an extension of their lives. She was her own person, capable of more than they had ever given her credit for. Her journey had just begun, and no matter what, she was determined to see it through. The weeks that followed were a mix of excitement and solitude for Emma. While her days were filled with exploration and discovery, there was an underlying loneliness that often swept over her in the quiet moments of the evening. She would walk through the narrow streets of Athens, watching the locals laugh and converse with ease, and sometimes she felt a pang of longing. She had always been a part of something, her family, her role in their lives, but now she was truly on her own, carving her own path, and while she was free, it also felt strangely empty. She spent more time in cafes, sketching, writing, and observing people. There was something about the anonymity that felt comforting. She wasn't anyone's daughter here. No one expected her to be perfect, to meet expectations, to carry the weight of their unspoken judgments. For the first time in her life, she was free to just exist without feeling like a disappointment. But there were still moments when the memories of her family crept in. She would see a family walking together, and for a split second, the image of her mother and brother flashed in her mind. It wasn't always anger or bitterness that she felt. It was more of a dull ache, a loss that seemed to echo through the empty spaces of her heart. She had loved them, truly, even when they had abandoned her. But the abandonment was still a wound she hadn't fully healed. One afternoon, Emma was sitting at her favorite cafe, nursing a coffee as she stared out at the busy square. The sun was setting, painting the buildings in a golden hue, and she felt a sense of peace wash over her. It was a fleeting moment of serenity, but it was enough to remind her of how far she had come. She wasn't the same person who had been left behind in that small Italian town, desperate to prove her worth to her family. She was someone new, someone who didn't need anyone's validation to feel complete. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a message from her brother, Ben. His words were simple, but they stung just the same. "Where you? You left without saying anything. We miss you." Emma sat still for a moment, her fingers hovering over the screen. Part of her wanted to respond, to pour out all the emotions that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long. She wanted to tell him about the hurt, the abandonment, the years of feeling invisible. But she didn't. Instead, she placed her phone face down on the table and looked out at the street, watching the people around her. They were laughing, talking, living their lives without any idea of the weight she had carried for so long. No, Emma thought, I'm not going back. Not like this. Not unless they understand who I really am. There was a shift inside her, a quiet resolve, a strength that had been building inside her since the moment she had stepped off that plane in Greece. She didn't need their approval anymore. She didn't need their love if it was conditional. She was enough on her own. As days turned into weeks, Emma began to feel a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. She enrolled in a local art class, something she had always wanted to do but had never been able to pursue with her family's expectations hanging over her head. Slowly, she started to develop her own voice, not just in her art but in her life. The people she met here weren't trying to mold her into something she wasn't. They accepted her for who she was, quiet, reserved, but strong in ways they couldn't see. One evening, as she sat in a small gallery, admiring the work of local artists, Emma had a moment of clarity. She had been searching for a sense of belonging all her life, but what she had been missing all along wasn't a place or a family. It was her own sense of worth. She was enough, just as she was, and no amount of love or validation from her family could change that. She wasn't running away from them anymore. She was running toward herself. As weeks turned into months, Emma's life in Greece began to take on a rhythm of its own. She had found a job working at a small cafe where the locals had become like a second family to her. They didn't ask her about her past. They didn't judge her for her quiet nature or her reserved demeanor. Instead, they accepted her for who she was, a stranger who had wandered into their world and decided to stay. She spent her free time exploring the city, taking long walks through the ancient streets of Athens, finding solace in the bustling markets and quiet corners of the city. Her art continued to improve, and she began to feel a sense of pride in her work. She was finally beginning to see herself not as the person her family had defined her to be, but as someone with her own dreams and ambitions. But despite the new life she was building, there were still moments when the pain of being abandoned crept back into her thoughts. She had created a new identity for herself, one that was strong and independent, but there were nights when she would sit alone in her small apartment, looking at the empty space around her and wonder if her family ever thought about her. Did they miss her? Did they regret their decision to leave her behind? She would never know the answers to those questions. But what she did know was that her family's rejection had forced her to face herself, to look deeper into her own soul and ask who she really was without their influence. She was Emma, the girl who had once been shattered by her family's abandonment but had found a way to pick up the pieces. She was a woman who didn't need anyone to tell her she was enough. She had proven that to herself every day since the moment she had left Italy, and she would continue proving it, even if it meant doing it alone. Her quiet strength had become her shield, and she used it to carve out a space in this new life. She had stopped looking back, and with each passing day, the pain of her past became more distant, more irrelevant. The more she thrived in her new world, the more she realized that leaving her family behind had been the best decision she had ever made. Her art, once an afterthought, had now become her passion. She spent long hours perfecting her craft, and soon enough, her work began to catch the attention of local galleries. She was invited to showcase her pieces in a small exhibition, and the opening night was a turning point for Emma. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Her work, her voice, was being appreciated, not for who her family thought she was, but for who she had become on her own. The evening of the exhibition, as she stood among the guests, she realized that this was what she had been searching for all along. Validation not from others, but from herself. She had walked away from everything she knew, and in doing so, she had discovered the strength within her to build a life she could be proud of. The guests complimented her work, praising her talent and dedication, but it was the quiet satisfaction in Emma's heart that meant the most. She didn't need anyone else's approval to feel proud of herself. The quiet sense of achievement she felt in that moment was the culmination of everything she had worked for since leaving her family behind. In the months that followed, Emma's reputation as an artist continued to grow. She began receiving invitations from other cities, even other countries, to showcase her work. The dreams she had once kept hidden, locked away beneath the weight of her family's expectations, were now within reach. She had become more than the girl they had abandoned in that small Italian town. She had become the woman she had always been meant to be, independent, strong, and unapologetically herself. It had been nearly 6 months since Emma left everything behind in Italy. Her life in Greece was everything she had hoped for, peaceful, fulfilling, and independent. Her art was thriving, and she had cultivated a sense of belonging in a place that had no ties to her past. She was free, and for the first time, she felt like she was truly living for herself. But, as is often the case with the past, it has a way of catching up with you when you least expect it. One late evening, while Emma was at her small apartment working on a new painting, Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. She hesitated for a moment, her heart rate quickening. Could it be someone from her past? She had worked hard to shut that chapter of her life away, but a part of her still wondered about her family, especially her mother and brother. The message was short, but enough to make her freeze in place. "Emma, it's Mom. We need to talk. Please call me." Her stomach churned, and for a moment, she considered ignoring the message. It had been a long time since she'd heard from her mother, and Emma had learned to live without her. There was no reason to go back, no reason to open that door again. But the desire for answers, the need for closure, pulled at her. After a moment of indecision, she picked up the phone and dialed the number. The phone rang twice before her mother answered. "Emma." Claire's voice was tentative, almost shaky. I don't know how to start, but I need you to know that we've made a mistake. Your father and I." Emma cut her off before she could continue. She wasn't ready to hear her mother's excuses or the words that would only serve to reopen old wounds. "What do you want, Mom?" Emma's voice was calm but firm. Her words were measured, careful. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Emma could almost hear her mother's hesitation. "We've come to Greece," Claire finally said. "We've been looking for you. We want to see you again." A rush of emotions hit Emma all at once. Anger, confusion, and a strange sense of disappointment. This was the family that had abandoned her, the family who had laughed at her pain, who had driven away without a second thought, telling her she would never come back. Now, months later, they were asking for her forgiveness? Emma's voice remained steady as she responded, her heart resolute. "You don't need to come looking for me, Mom. I'm not the same person you left behind in Italy. I've moved on, and I don't need to relive the past with you." Her mother's voice cracked slightly. "Emma, please. We were wrong. We were angry and we didn't think about you. But we miss you. Please give us a chance." The words were so familiar, so typical of her mother's attempts to manipulate and guilt-trip her. Emma's silence in response spoke volumes. She no longer had the same attachment, the same need for her mother's approval. She wasn't a little girl anymore, waiting for a mother's love and validation. She was an adult, strong, independent, and self-sufficient. "I'm sorry, Mom," Emma said, her voice gentle but unyielding. "I can't go back. I've built a life for myself here, and I won't let you or anyone else tear it down. I've already forgiven you in my own way, but that's not something you need to be a part of anymore." There was a long pause. Claire didn't respond immediately. Emma could tell she was trying to process her words, trying to understand how her daughter could be so resolute. The guilt, the regret was thick in the air, but Emma had made her decision. "I have to go," Emma added, not waiting for another reply. "Take care of yourselves." She ended the call without waiting for Claire to respond. The silence that followed was final, heavy with the weight of everything Emma had just said. The call had been brief, but it had stirred something deep within her. She wasn't angry anymore. She was free, free from the past, free from the guilt and shame they had tried to burden her with. And as the evening sun dipped below the horizon, Emma knew that this was the closure she had been seeking. The people who had abandoned her could never have a place in her life again, not unless they were willing to accept her on her terms, not on theirs. She had made her peace, and now she could truly let go. The days following Emma's conversation with her mother were a strange mix of relief and reflection. She'd held the line, her composure unwavering, and in that moment she had realized something profound. She no longer needed anyone's approval. She had proven to herself that she could live, thrive, and grow without the shadow of her family's expectations looming over her. But the months that followed would offer Emma a deeper lesson, one that would come in the form of quiet but undeniable triumph. Her art career continued to soar. She secured commissions for her paintings. Her work featured in galleries that began attracting the attention of critics. What had started as a small passion project in a tiny apartment had transformed into a full-fledged career. Her paintings were selling for more than she had ever imagined, and for the first time, She felt like she was truly in control of her destiny. But Emma's success was not something that went unnoticed. One day, as she was walking down the street in Athens, she passed a small cafe and saw a familiar face, her brother Jake. He was sitting at a table, sipping coffee, staring off into the distance as though lost in thought. Emma's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't hesitate. She walked on, her stride confident and steady. She had nothing to prove to him, and certainly nothing to say. Jake had been the one who had laughed with their parents that fateful day, the one who had driven away without a second thought. She had expected him to be different, to stand up for her, but when it mattered most, he hadn't. Still, Emma had forgiven him long ago, not because he deserved it, but because she understood that the past could not define her. A week later, Jake reached out to Emma. It was a simple text, no apology, just a line that read, "I've been hearing about your art. Proud of you." Emma read the message with little emotion, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Should she respond? What was there to say? She sat with the phone in her hands for a long moment, the weight of the past pressing down on her. She could feel the bitterness bubbling up inside, but she also felt the quiet strength she had built in the months since she'd left. She wasn't going to let anger cloud her growth. Finally, she typed a short, neutral reply. "Thanks." She didn't expect a reply, but it didn't matter. She didn't need a response to feel validated. What mattered was that she had achieved something on her own. She had made it. Her success was hers to keep. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when she received an invitation to an exclusive art exhibit in Paris. It was a major event in the art world, and Emma's work had been selected to be featured. It was the opportunity she had been working for, the recognition she had longed for. As she stood before the framed pieces of her art, surrounded by people who appreciated her work, Emma realized just how far she had come. She wasn't the girl who had been abandoned in Italy. She wasn't the girl who had been laughed at by her family. She was someone entirely different now. Stronger, wiser, and far beyond the small, hurt version of herself that had once begged for love and acceptance. And as she received praise from fellow artists and collectors, Emma felt something she hadn't in a long time: peace. She had found her purpose, her passion, and most importantly, her independence. Her family had tried to break her, to tear her down, but instead, they had unknowingly fueled her rise. The quiet triumph was the sweetest victory of all. The final moment came when Emma received an unexpected call from her mother. It had been months since they last spoke, and her mother's voice on the other end of the line was tentative, almost unsure. "Emma, I've been thinking about you," Claire said, her words hesitant, weighed down by the years of silence and hurt that hung between them. "I've been following your art career. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, and I'm sorry for the way everything turned out. I should have been there for you. I made a mistake." For a moment, Emma was silent. Her heart didn't race. No storm of emotions surged inside her. Instead, she felt a calmness, a stillness that came from the knowledge that she didn't need her mother's validation. She had done it all on her own, without any of their support, and had proven to herself just how capable she was. She took a deep breath, her voice calm and steady as she replied, "I appreciate you reaching out, Mom, but I've moved on. I've found my own way." It wasn't harsh, but it wasn't forgiving either. There was no anger, no resentment, just an acceptance of the fact that they had both changed. Emma had become someone different, someone strong, someone who no longer needed to hold on to the past. "I don't need your approval to be who I am," Emma continued. "And I don't need to go back to that life to move forward. I've learned what I needed to learn, and I've grown. I'm okay, Mom. I've always been." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Claire's voice was barely a whisper when she spoke again. "I understand. I hope we can be a family again someday." Emma knew that would never happen, not in the way her mother envisioned. But that was all right. She wasn't the same person who had yearned for family approval. She had built her own family, a family of friends, of people who respected her for who she was, not what they wanted her to be. As she hung up the phone, Emma stood by the window, looking out over the city she had made her own. She had been broken, abandoned, and betrayed, but now she was whole, stronger, more at peace. Her success, her silence, her strength, they were her own. And in that quiet moment, Emma realized that the true victory wasn't in making her family see her worth. It was in recognizing her own worth. The girl who had once been abandoned in a small town in Italy had grown into a woman who could stand tall on her own. She didn't need their approval. She had finally found her peace,